All right. Hey, everyone. It has been an incredible season 1 of the Drafting Table. Thank you so much to everyone for being with us, to our incredible guests. We have gotten so many awesome comments, DMs, questions, suggestions. So we thought we'd take this last episode and make it a special one where we'd go through all of the top questions that were asked, especially of us as seed stage investors here at Workbench. And so without further ado, let's dive in. The number one question we often get is, how do I know if my idea is good enough to build a company around? The irony sometimes of whether or not knowing if your idea is good enough to build a company around is you won't actually know for a long time, right? What you will know is whether or not you are solving a customer's pain point. That is what it comes down to. And I always think, the best founders, of course, are the ones who are obsessed with their ideas, the ones who wake up every day thinking, hey, why do we do it this way? This is crazy. There has to be a better way. Now, the question often I think people are really asking is whether or not this is a venture scale business, right? Should I be taking venture capital? Will I get venture scale returns? And that is a much more different calculus. But to be honest, I think for most founders, the thing you need to think about day in, day out is, can I find 10 customers with this burning pain point, and can I help solve it for them? And if you can find those 10, and then another 10, and then another 10, you will build a great company. And then from there, you can figure out a lot of other things, whether or not it's venture scale or not. But find those first customers, understand their pain points, build something that solves it for them. And that in of itself is a great company. How much validation or traction do I need before raising from a VC? This is a question we often get, especially for pre-seed and seed founders who think a lot about the timing of going to an investor. And the real way I think about this question is, if you zoom out, how do you build a great company, right? Oftentimes people think I wanted to come up with an idea so I can raise funding. I actually think you should go and build a great company. And if and when you need funding, that is when you should go raise. So a minor difference, but a very significant one. A good example would be, hey, I started building something in the software space. We've gotten a lot of demand from customers. I've been building and bootstrapping myself. I have a few employees. We've paid ourselves very little. But we have so much demand now that we really need to go out and meet them. That is the ideal time to go raise from an investor, because there's a very clear pain point. There's a very clear plan as to how you will spend that capital. I think the most challenging is when you have an idea and it's not quite yet validated. It hasn't hit the road yet. And that when you're going to go meet investors, that's often the hardest time because you quite frankly don't have the traction. I think the other thing that most people don't talk about enough as well as fundraising is that it is a momentum game, right? And so oftentimes, historically, people say, okay, if I hit $1 million of ARR, I will be able to go out and raise. The reality is that is all completely changed, right? The benchmarks continue to change now given the AI cycle. But the other, reality is that you can often have many slow quarters or even a few slow years, but it's really all about that upward slope of when you go out and raise that is going to make or break you. And so we have companies that are very, very slow for many years and then have a huge uptick and go 3x, 4x. And that is actually the best time for fundraising. And so think a little bit about the narrative and the momentum play and that timing, which can be really critical. Should I build a prototype or MVP before fundraising? The answer for this is yes. In today's world, especially with so much vibe coding, with ChatGPT, there's so many ways in which you can build a very, very good MVP, actually, and get out to customers and get out to real prospects and get very real feedback and maybe even some good customer usage based on MVP. Now, we all know these MVPs are, will likely have to be rebuilt, of course, but the days of having only a pitch deck when you go to an investor is long gone. If anything, it's easier than ever to build something from scratch, perhaps arguably too easy. And so you got to be able to ship, and then you got to be able to sell. And only then can you learn and go deeper and build a bigger gap between you and what is going to be likely many, many competitors now. Here's another good one. Okay, so do I need a co-founder? And if I do, what should I look for in one? So I always say, if I had a preference, yes, I think you should have a co-founder for a lot of reasons. One is ultimately it's a really, really long ride, right? And it is what we call a sinusoidal roller coaster. It is such highs, lowest lows. The biggest thing I see is that just having a co-founder is someone there as almost like an emotional partner for the days when things are really tough. In general, your other partner, your co-founder, hopefully is a little up, and days when you're high, and vice versa. And so I'm very lucky to have an amazing co-founder, Jonathan Lair at Workbench, over the past 12 years. Have seen both, right? Have seen solo founders, have seen founders where it didn't work out, right? And ultimately, I definitely, as an investor, have a preference, right? I think as a solo founder, there's always, of course, the risk of key man risk. But there are great companies that have been built with solo founders. The thing I would advise anyone, though, when they're starting a company is, can you really build this ultimately on your own, right? Generally with two founders, we see one can ship and one can sell. And so if you can do both, that's great. But generally you'll need someone to complement your skills. And that often in the early days is two co-founders. But of course, I've seen many different permutations. I think ultimately is, how can you make sure that from an emotional perspective that you have the support that you need over what could be a decade-long journey, and it can be very, very lonely. And so co-founder can help a ton in that. What do investors want to see the most at seed stage? This is a great question, and the timing is changing a lot because the answer is changing a lot because of the market, right? We're seeing now with AI, a lot of the growth benchmarks have shifted and have become very, very impressive. You're hearing companies go from 0 to 1 million, 0 to 2 million, 0 to 3 million in months and short years. And so what used to be the benchmarks for a great seed have now been ratcheted up. I think ultimately, though, even for us at Workbench, the key thing is really around customer proof points, right? For us, the revenue number is, of course, impressive. But at the end of the day, how many customers have you been able to sell into? How many of them use your product a lot every day? How many of them love your product? How many of them would speak super highly of it? And then the question is, how many times can you repeat that, right? Repeatability is now such a critical part of seed stage, which is, hey, are these 10 random companies that you found, or are these 10 very similar companies and very similar ICPs that you are able to then go out and rinse and repeat and find another 10 more of those? And that is often the hardest part, is the repeatability piece. How do I find and approach investors? Again, these days, investors are so easy to find online, and it's actually quite an open book in some ways of how to go out and reach out to them and contact them. The question, though, is how do you approach them in the best way possible to set you up in the best light? And I think a lot of it is just like sales, right? Just as you would do cold outreach or warm outreach to a prospective customer, how do you treat an investor like that too? And so, the best, of course, in general, is always a warm intro if possible. The other best, though, is, if you're going to do cold outreach, we've gotten some incredible cold outreach emails over the years, right? Really, really thoughtful emails from founders that you can tell they really spent time, thought about it, crafted it, and those really stand out. Of course, the ones that are most challenging, that do not need to be said, but will probably still worth a mention, are the ones that are, of course, spammy, or the ones that you can tell are automated, right? If you're going to do that, then it's really not worth the time. All right, here's go-to-market. So at Workbench, we nerd out deep on go-to-market. So this question here is, how do I get my first 10 customers? And I will say there's no easy shortcut, right? It is kind of hand-to-hand combat. That is how I call it. And it depends, of course, if your customers, if you're doing top-down sales or bottoms-up sales. I would say for top-down sales, each customer, you just got to go out and knock them down. And the first two, first three, first five, first 10, those are the ones that you learn the most on, right? Because every data point will help you and your sales team, or just you, usually founder-led sales, understand what you need to do to get the next 10. So much of what I generally advise is how do you keep your ICP in general at that time as narrow as possible, right? It's very hard if at 11 a.m. you're selling to a bank and at 2 p.m. you're selling to a food and beverage company, and then at 5 p.m. you're selling, to a media company. It's very hard then to get the repeatability that we've talked about. It's very hard to then get enough reps to learn what is working or not. And so what I like to say is have a hypothesis as much as possible. Maybe in the first year, we're going to really triple down on banks. And we believe we will sell really well to banks. And even within banks, what type of bank, what segment of banks. And from there, you will be able to see a lot more A/B opportunities for A/B testing because all the companies more or less are more similar than different types of organizations. So that is often how we think about how we advise companies and founders to focus early on. So how important is it to pick a specific vertical early on? It's funny because in one of the other episodes, I spoke with two healthcare founders of Adonis and Tenor here in New York City. And hearing their early journeys was actually really interesting, right? Because you're often told a few things as founders. You're told focus. But then you're also another kind of school of thought right now that's been going around is this concept of compound startups, which is, hey, build as wide as possible, get as much surface area as possible, a la rippling, and that's how you win. But the advice that they gave there at this panel was a really interesting one, which is, hey, in the early days, you don't exactly know your product market fit, right? So oftentimes you're keeping it relatively wide because you want to test as many different things. It's only then when you start feeling pull on maybe one or two or three use cases that you need to start bringing things in. You need to start getting as much focus as possible because at the end of the day, you need to build a world-class product for a very specific user or customer. And then you need to have the go-to-market motion that matches that. And it's very hard if you have a very limited team that is trying to sell to 10 different types of customers, right? So the question is, how do you go wide in the beginning, try to find the pull, and then bring it way in and get as much focus as possible? And then at some point what ends up happening is you get a lot of focus, you start doing really well in the segments, and you likely have to pull it back out again and go really wide again. And that is when you go multi-product strategy, build out the platform, try to go after more and more segments and verticals and so forth. But that usually doesn't happen for a while, right? So I think this like narrow, wide is a really interesting way to think about all this. How do I hire my first few employees without a lot of capital? This is a very chicken or egg kind of question, right? Because founders often say, hey, I need to raise money so I can hire. But also, you need to ideally have shipped something and to have proof points to show that you should raise. Again, nowadays it's a little bit easier to get MVP up, but in general, you will still likely need a team to help build out a product for you, especially in the enterprise. And so much of this is it's like fundraising, right? It is selling a dream of sorts. And I think about our founders and some of the founding teammates they were able to bring on. And I'm so impressed by them, right? I'm so impressed by how they've been able to bring on such smart, such hardworking, such committed people who also believe in the dream. And that's what it comes down to is you need to be able to sell that dream. It is going to be difficult, I think, with with limited capital. And that's why those early teammates really do have to be 10x folks who are maybe able to code and who are able to also talk to customers, right? And people often wear so many different hats. But that is where every early team member has to be truly a multiplier. And hopefully these days there is a lot more efficiency that can be done. And so you perhaps maybe don't need quite as many teammates in the early days to get out those initial proof points and getting out to customers. But it is definitely chicken or egg. And on that last one, in terms of hiring your first few employees without a lot of capital, again, so many of the DNA of people who are founding teammates are joining something because they really believe in it. They really believe in the mission. They really believe in the vision. There is DNA of a lot of these early stage employees who really, want to build something from the ground up, who want to feel like they're making an impact. And those are the people that you need to find. And we talk about hiring a lot at Workbench. How do we hire the first few teammates? A few pro tips I'll just say here. The JDs that I've seen do incredibly well are the ones that bring a lot of life into the work, a lot of color, a lot of character. The ones I love are the ones that actually show, hey, this is Tim on our team. This is the type of work he's done. This is how he's been so exceptional at it, right? These are all the traits that we look for, similar to him, and how we're looking to hire. I think when you can really paint a very clear picture and a very specific picture of what the work looks like and what the impact is, that's when it can get really, really fun. Yeah. So here's I think this question is an interesting one. And it's one that, once you get started, you'll know. But what's the hardest part of being a founder? I laugh too because John and I at Workbench founded the firm 12 years ago now. And we have had our shares of ups and downs. We covered this on our episode all around fundraising and launching new fund. And I think the things to think about are, like I said, the highs are so high and such great feeling, and the lows can be so low. And what's really crazy is the span in which they can happen, right? It can literally be like 1 p.m., best call ever, 2 p.m., worst call ever, 3:30 p.m., best call ever again, right? And so you live many lives in one day. And so that is what I would say with all the founders we're so lucky to work with at Workbench is you wake up every day and you just have to go and hit the wall, right? And oftentimes I'll say it feels like 2 steps back, 1 step forward, right? But like if you do that over time enough, right? There is forward movement. We're so lucky. Our founders are the ones who are doing Herculean things, who believe in something so deeply that they're willing to endure the pain of enterprise sales and all the challenges that come with that. So I can't say enough. I think the best founders are the ones who are just able to hear no more often than anyone else, right? And the reality is that most adults don't like to hear no, and hearing no is uncomfortable, it's painful. And our founders are the ones who hear no and say, bring it on, who say, I'm coming back for more. And those are the ones who have been able to build something really, really incredible and special. All right, a few more questions. So here's one, which is, this is really the basis for this entire show when we launched the drafting table, which is, so maybe we want to become founders, right? And there's different times and places for when people should make that leap. But in the meantime, are there specific things that people can be doing to build up their certain skill sets or muscles so that when they do become a founder, they're primed and ready? And so we've had an incredible season of guests who've come on and talked about different topics around this across sales and marketing and product and design engineering. And so we've had awesome conversations. What I would still say boils down to the few that really jump out at me. I think sales is such a critical one, right? And the reason I say that is because most founders that we meet are incredible product minds, so technical, can ship incredible products. But sales is something that most people have to learn on the job because it's not something you learn in school. And so the more exposure that you can get into sales, maybe it's at your current company, you are given more and more opportunities to talk to customers. I would say that you're given more opportunities to work alongside sales teams, to understand sales processes, anything that gets you closer and closer to customers, and especially closer and closer to understanding different sales. That is where I would highly, highly recommend any pre-founder to get that exposure because it will only serve you much, much better once you're underway. All right. So when is the right time to hire a sales rep versus founder-led sales? So, for almost all companies I work with at pre-seed and seed, it starts with founder-led sales. At some point, a founder will say, hey, I want to bring on a rep. In general, that only ever happens after a very, very clear sales playbook has been written by the founder in terms of, hey, this is the exact script that we use, this is the exact process, this is the exact motion, this is how we handle objections and so forth. And it's only then when a founder truly cannot keep up with all the calls, with all the volume, with all the opportunities, that they should bring in another rep. That is our general guidance and rule of thumb. A lot of times founders say, hey, I don't really like sales. I want to pass off to someone. That is not, unfortunately, a good use of time and process. Like, you've got to be able to figure out yourself before you can hire anyone to come on and have them learn your process, right? It is extremely risky to hire someone, have them come on, ask them to figure that out, because really in the early days, the only best person who can sell the vision and the dream is you as a founder, right? And you as a founder, you can actually go a very long way in talking about product roadmap, talking about the vision for the company, even if the product is not there yet. That is much, much harder to do for a rep to do so. So the general guidance is to be founder-led sales, honestly, for as long as possible, until perhaps at some point you're feeling, hey, we're really leaving opportunity monies on the table because I just do not have enough hours in the day. How do I know when I've truly found product market fit? One of the very fun episodes we did was with Kevin Wang of Braze. And, his line is that people think product market fit is this effortless, smooth feeling. He's like, you have to beg, borrow, steal effectively to reach product market fit. You have to be really, really shameless. You need to be pinging people. You need to be asking people lots of questions. You need to be trying to get in the door. It is not this very pleasant experience, I guess. And I totally agree, right? You almost sometimes have to be willing to do a lot of things to get there. And so it might mean cold calling 100 people, right? And getting a lot of no's. And again, the no's are not the challenge. I actually often say getting to a quick no is such a favor, right? The worst is when you have opportunities where the conversations are dragging out. It's a maybe. Those are the ones that are really challenging for our founders, because what happens is you end up spending a lot of time on those opportunities. And some of them may or may not convert. Some of them may or may not even be really good ICP. The best ones are the ones who tell you, hey, this is not a good fit. That's great. That is a data point for us. We learn, we move on, or we come back to them, right? And we put them in our nurture pipeline. So I would say that is with product market fit, getting to knows, and then trying to get everyone else to a yes as quickly as possible. Oh, this is a great question, which is, can you go enterprise first straight away? Or can you go to enterprise customers straight away, or do you need to go to SMB, mid-market, and so forth? We get this question all the time. As enterprise software investors at Workbench, we often have people think that our companies are selling to Fortune 500s right away from day one. Some of them are, for sure. Some of them, based on their product or their backgrounds or experiences, definitely are able to go to Fortune 500s in the early days. However, they generally are also still trying to sell to mid-market as well, right? And it's really just because Fortune 500 sales cycles are so long. And so you are seeing a blend generally, almost always, from our companies. I think the key thing that we've always said is, if you do know that you want to sell to the enterprise one day, at least in the early days, be very thoughtful about how you architect your product, right? And there's a number of things that you should take into account, whether that's the data model, whether that's architecture, whether that's security, whether that's privacy, whatever it is. All of those considerations are much more different for an enterprise customer than an SMB customer. And so what you'll need to do is at least build your product accordingly. Maybe day one, you of course don't have SSO and all the things that you need, but you should be aware that that is coming on the roadmap and how that will fit into your product goals over time. The hardest thing is building SMB product, realizing, hey, I actually want to go sell a market, and realizing you have to completely refactor or honestly rebuild a lot of your product from the ground up. That is very, very difficult. So again, even if you do not land those customers in the first, even a few years, just knowing that you can build your product or shape your product to be so and to serve those customers longer term is very, very important decision to make in the early days. I think the other question we also get is in terms of going enterprise first or SMB is you absolutely can sell out to SMB customers first, mid-market first, and then move up market to enterprise. However, the thing you absolutely have to realize is that you will have to change your entire sales organization at your company. And the reality is that most SMB sales reps are not the same sales reps that can sell into large Fortune 500 customers. They're just very different profiles, their experiences, and their skill set is totally different. It's very hard to mold them. I have seen founders try. And I think ultimately you just have to recognize that, hey, these are two different types of profiles. We can keep selling SMB, but if we do want to go to enterprise, we need to hire entirely new sales reps, even post-sales people, implementation, and so forth. And the expectations there are quite different. And so just knowing that that is a transition that you'll have to make, it also is not an easy transition to make. And so being aware of that and knowing that that's coming down the pipe. Other best practices we often share, always hire reps, at least in groups of two, right? I think a lot of people talk about this, but the reason is a little competition is always a good thing. If chances are if a rep doesn't work out, you always have at least one backup. And so it's also helpful in the early days to be able to benchmark against each other to understand, okay, is this the process? Is this, the rep, or is this the product? Whatever the variables are, having at least two reps is always really critical. Another thing that we often say at Workbench is all about change management. It's perhaps my favorite topic to talk about, right? And the reality is this, and we've talked about this a lot on the season here at the drafting table, is you can ship a great product, but the reality is if you're selling to a large organization or a large team, they will likely have to make some changes around their processes or their behaviors in order to use your software, right? Ideally, not too much change on behavior. That is also really hard if you require dramatic behavior change. Just be aware of that. But let's just even say from a process perspective, some things will have to change because they are now using your workflow software. And I believe that founders oftentimes underestimate how much change management is required. And so I always say, if there is any change management needed, you as a founder, you as the company should be aware of that. And as much as possible for you to guide that process, right? You won't be able to be necessarily in all the meetings where these conversations happen, but you should be aware of what those meetings are about. You should be the ones advising them as much as possible. And as net, just helping them make the process as seamless as possible. You never want there to be a reason for them to say no to you. And the reality is a lot of them will think, hey, there's so much work required on our end to implement and onboard the software. It's going to require how many meetings and teams and trainings and onboarding. So the more that you can be thinking through, hey, customer X, customer Y, this is how we would recommend thinking about the different steps and processes in order to onboard your team, for them to use our software the most effectively. That is on us. I always say, that is absolutely on us to be thinking through and advising and being that coach, if you will, to make sure that your product can land as successfully as possible. This is the last very common thing I say almost all the time to our founders, which is 90% of enterprise sales happens when you're not in the room. And if you really think about that, it's because there's all this other stuff that has to happen after you've done your pitch meeting and all your calls, is they usually then have to go to their boss, their manager, their peers, etc., and try to get buy-in to, again, use your software. This is not easy, right? Depending on the organization, there can be many roadblocks, many challenges in order to do so. And so the question is, how are you arming your champion in order to go and have those conversations? And the number one thing I say is you have to treat your champion almost as if they're a sales rep on your team, right? And you need to arm them either with decks, with assets, with anything and they need in order to make the case for you. And you have to remember that their job is not to think about your company every day, right? And generally, if they're your champion, they're doing this, because they really believe in you, because they believe in the software, but this is not their full-time job. And so how do you make their lives as easy as possible so that when they go and have those conversations with their boss about why this tool is so necessary, you have given them everything they need. You've given them a deck, you've given them training on even how to pitch your company, how to talk about the ROI and how to calculate it, how to handle objections and any questions that might come their way, right? Too often I see founders leave that just kind of up in the air and say, oh, well, they'll be able to go and figure it out. And you should absolutely not leave that up in the air. And you should train your champions as much as you honestly train your sales reps. And again, give them everything that they need and arm them with everything that they need so that they can be successful in helping to sell for you. I thought this one episode was so critical, which was all around how many leads do I need, right? And this was with Alex Rosenblatt of Datadog, all around marketing. And I still believe marketing is one of the most difficult areas within a startup to build out. In general, I find, folks can ship product. In general, I'm finding founders more or less know the basics of sales, but marketing, one, has changed so much and it's continuing to change and it's become a ton of tools, a tons of tactics. And it's become very technical. And so I actually loved how Alex boiled it down in so many simple ways. I loved how Alex really boiled it down to one very simple formula. And what he said was this: too many founders are trying to boil the ocean, right? They're trying to get as many leads as possible, but you actually don't need that many leads, right? If you're a seed stage company, you actually only need a set number of leads in order to hit your target ARR number by the end of the year, right? Or in the quarter and then the month. And so let's assume you need to close 10 deals every month. How many leads do you need in order to close those 10 deals? You don't need 2,000, right? You probably need like 3x coverage. So you probably need 30, let's say even 40 really good leads. How will you get 30 to 40 or 50 really good leads? And what you then need to do is then be able to focus your efforts on just 50 or so. And so it could be going to a conference and being very targeted, right? It could be looking at your target account list and creating content for 50 really good leads. It could be hosting an event, right? That is a customer dinner that is very focused, again, on just 10 to 20 prospects. I thought that was such a useful and honestly, how to say, like, sanity checked way of thinking about it. It just brings what could feel very overwhelming, which is, hey, we need blog posts and SEO and all this, content marketing and so forth. And you bring it way down. You say you don't need the whole ocean. You just need a few very qualified leads, because at the end of the day, you need those leads to convert. Again, we often see founders trying to do a lot, trying to do too much often. And what ends up happening is those leads then are not, one, either very qualified, or two, you almost have too many leads and your team does not have all the time to go through them all. And in those cases, blown leads are also just not a good use of time or money. And so you might as well focus on and hone in on a few very good, few very qualified, thoughtful leads that you can really work through, and at the end of the day, that you can close. Here's a question that Danny and I talked about earlier in one of our episodes, which is, do I need to have deep domain expertise as a founder versus can I start a company in a space I know I might not come from. There's a lot of different ways to answer it. And you see so many different profiles of successful founders. The reality is that there is no one answer. Our preference at Workbench for sure is for founders with deep domain expertise. And the only reason we say that is in this, game of startup life, every advantage you have, every single, even micro advantage you have can compound, right? And so if you have domain expertise, then you will likely be a little further ahead than someone who does not have domain expertise. If you know how to build great products, then you'll be a little bit further ahead than someone who doesn't. If you know how to sell, you'll be a little further ahead than someone who doesn't. So again, all of these things over time really do compound. And the reality is you need every advantage when you are starting a company, to just be able to break away from competitors. And so every advantage you have can help. That said, there are a lot of people who also believe if you come from outside of the domain, you actually have a fresher perspective. You're able to think about this problem space a lot more differently than everyone else. And so absolutely can see both sides to that. But just something to think about is, again, where do I find any competitive advantage and differentiation wherever possible? All right, last question, which is all around what are we seeing these days in terms of the founders that we're backing, investing, who we're most excited about at Workbench. The founders that we've become most excited about at Workbench are really the ones who have a very, very unique perspective on the world. And the reason why that's really important these days is that there are lots of companies that often look very, very similar because it's easier than ever to build and ship products. And so founders really need to come in with a very, very unique perspective on the world, that think about the world differently, who actually might have a contrarian or a hot take perspective different than everyone else, and say, hey, look, I know everyone else is building in this space and this is how they're approaching it. The reason I think it should actually come from this other angle or this other approach is because of, again, my experiences, my learnings, talking to customers. And those are the ones that are so, so refreshing. Those are the conversations that are most fun. And they're the biggest learning, we've learned at Workbench over the past 12 years is, you can't do what everyone else does and expect to win, right? The ones ultimately who are outliers by definition are the ones who are improbable, who take a different road or a different path than everyone else. And so that's something to think about. That's what we'd love to leave you with, is what is the different path that you can take that is uniquely yours, that other competitors are doing differently. And so have your own perspective, carve your own path, and have a lot of fun. All right. The last piece of advice I will leave for any and all founders is the startup life and startup journey is a long grind. It takes oftentimes many, many years. It's the beauty of and joy of working with startups and early stage teams is having that same one dream, one team, the mission and the vision. And again, having fun with it, right? And doing things a little bit differently. And that's where we've seen the best companies often are the ones who really embrace being different and lean into that and work really, really, really hard. I mean, beyond hard. And for that, I respect them so, so much. But above all, it's being able to find the fun, because the journey is long and you want to do something different and you want to be able to have fun along the way. All right. That is a wrap, folks, on season 1 of The Drafting Table. Thank you so, so, so much for all of your support. As always, if you have more questions, shoot me a message, an email, DM on LinkedIn. We so love hearing from you and hope that this season was really helpful for any pre-founders out there, or any founders, or anyone who's just even interested in this space on what are some of the best skills to learn as you think about becoming a founder. We so, so appreciate all your support, and we will see you very soon.